My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piranyo, fellow Jnanis. I hope all of you all are doing well. The weather is very hot today. So hope all of you all are coping with the heat wave that is, that is impacting everybody in the country. So today I'm going to conclude Mahan's, discussion in chapter 18 on births, rebirths, reincarnation, and so on. And we covered almost 5 satsangs on this. And I'm just going to give you a quick summary, and then I'll come to Mahan's perspective of this from the iGod. So we saw different models of birth, death, reincarnation, and we saw how, within ourselves, we've got 2 important bodies, which is the object body, the gross body, and then the subtle body. And when we looked at very deeply, we saw that what do we mean by birth and rebirths? When we look at much more deeper, most people think, well, there's a birth and death, and they take these things very, very seriously, get worried, as they age. And when you go deeper down to understanding what this thing called life, you see that birth and deaths, are part and parcel of life. And what about rebirths? What does rebirth actually mean from a material perspective? And we see that, our material body is made out of building blocks of this universe, and everything that you see in us exists also in the universe, and everything in the universe exists as our material body, oxygen, nitrogen, and so on. And we see that that makes up our earth, and our body comes from that earth. And we saw that, our body pretty much is built from the earth itself, right? And when we pass on, everything is disassembled back and given back to the earth, one form or another. And somebody else will take those building blocks and build their body, and this cycle continues. Yes, if one sees oneself, that form disappearing, a new form coming, they say, well, that's a birth and a death. But actually, in the building blocks, you see it's just a transformation that is taking place. So for Mahans, and great saints and great seers, they see even the changes in the material body, though there is changing, there is the basic building blocks remains the same. So they ask the question, what is it that is born and what is it that is die? When you scrutinize very carefully, you see that, birth and death is just a transition, an illusion. So we saw that in the first model. We also saw a little bit more deeper in that subtle body. Let's look at the subtle body. So the material building blocks emerge from this formless, dimensionless, what we call Irul, and we see that everything, manifests from there, including the smallest of the smallest, molecules and atoms and so on, that makes up, all the nitrogen and oxygen, and our earth. And we see that that also builds us, not just from a material body perspective, but also our spirit, what we call the consciousness. And you see that the Irul is imprinted in every facet of our lives, that substratum that is permanent, that is enabling all the changes that are happening. So we saw that, both in the spiritual body, we see that, it is permanent, it is infinite, and you see that, I put it purposely as black color as the transition's happening, and it's the same background as everything that background supports. So we see that even the subtle body in us is the permanent substratum. We wake up from it, we go back to sleep in it. So, and in between the waking and sleeping, we are in that, we are kind of, in that substratum that is holding everything together. So we see that the properties of the subtle body, I spoke about it. So we see that even in the subtle body, there is no birth and death. It is permanent and infinite. We saw that in the material body. We saw that in that, spiritual body. We also give an example of what reincarnation means, and how I spoke about the ocean and the water in the container. The gross body, the container, and the ocean is a Paramatma. A small, a fraction of that is embedded into that container called the body. But nevertheless, the H2O in the container and the H2O in the ocean are the same. So the body, the power that powers this body and the power of the universe are exactly the same. The DNA form may be different because of the container, but the substance remain the same. And we also I showed also the examples in the previous satsang on the reflections that we see, right? As long as the water is there, we get the reflection. This is the projections of our lives. When the water is not there, we see that the projections are not there. So we see that the consciousness, which is represented by the water, is critical in giving us that experience called life. No matter what the size of the container is, it reflects back. Right? So we see that gross body that contains the water or the consciousness is what gives that reflection of life, the dance of life. And we saw that in the previous satsang and, a YouTube clip. Then I spoke about, how is it that, some people say, well, they have experienced previous life and previous births and all those things. Well, you see that, in this material world, we have a continuum called time, and most human beings live up to maybe 76 or 78 if you are a woman, and 76 as a man, right? So we have a finite material lifespan. But within that material lifespan, that is being powered by something far greater, right? And that, though for most people are also limited by the frequency, as we start meditating, that horizon expands and we see that we are all connected to that horizon. And that horizon, so when the mind is able to tap into that infinite horizon, it transcends space and time. So what does that mean when you transcend space and time? For an ordinary person, the past, they cannot go back, or the future is not there. But for a Mahan, this is transcendental. So we see that, when you meditate, you get certain experiences that are transcendental, that when you come back and when you're back into the material body, you see, hey, the body is going there for the first time, but the experience, you have that experience of being there before. And that being there before is the body may not have gone there, at least displaced to that position, but the spirit is that transcendental that touches both, that transcends the space and time. So we see that, and sometimes people say that's reincarnation. Maybe so, but it's not in the way that people describe it. It is actually the soul connection that is transcendental time, that time doesn't really matter. It goes back thousands of years or future, you are still connected because the soul is eternal. So this is what we see, that when people have the glimpses of that, and you see elements of that also in Mahan's I God book, where he speaks about, things happen when he actually saw those things in the past. So again, when I come to that topic, I'll explain this phenomena. So we see this, so there are frameworks to try to explain birth, death, reincarnation, and so on. And we see that that's due to the characteristics of the two components that we have, the matter body and the spiritual body. So what does Mahan say in his perspective of reincarnation as what most people have spoken about? But if you read Advaita philosophy or Katha Upanishad or many of the Upanishads, you see that the consensus comes back to this kind of what Mahan says: before birth and after birth there is nothing. Nothing here, let me qualify, it's not absence of anything, it is no thing. It's the absence of that material identity that is continuously changing. So this is what Mahan says, that, not in the way that we wholesomely in the past, whatever sins we have done, we experience that today, and if we do whatever, so because the matter itself is dissolved, and the same thing, the spirit is eternal. So here Mahan goes on to explain this thing. He says that, nothing, that so the actual substratum that we are is the no thing, the absence of materiality. The absence of materiality is actually the spirit itself. So here Mahan then goes on to explain in this chapter. He says that, when bodies are formed and then perish, and when the atoms are dispersed from those bodies, those atoms do not have a memory of what they were in such bodies. All the atoms has is that the DNA, that information that is embedded, that, the cells at the cellular level or others, that gives instructions how it should, sustain nutrients and, replicate and so on. But other than that, it doesn't have memories of those experiences. So this is what we see in many, scriptures that Mahan, and many scriptures in Mahan's teachings here. So here again, he explains in this chapter, he says that if, beautiful artistic objects, made out of wood or, fine quality, and worthless things, all the things that we don't want, precision instruments that are made out of iron, or useless things that are, metal scraps, with rust, all the things, whether they are good or high quality or low quality, of no use. He says that when you put it in the fire, he says that they all become one with the fire. So in the same way, all our bodies, the material identities, all those things, when we put it into the fire, they all become one, whether the saint and the sinner, the pauper or the prince. So he explains that, they all become one with fire, lost their forms and disappear, as heat. So you see that when you burn them up, all of them will kind of evaporate, and dissolve. Similarly, he says there is nothing left when the bodies perish. So again, we see that, there's a continuous transformation that is taking place, and this wholesome memory embedded in the cells that gives you reincarnation. He says all that does not take place. So he goes on to say, when there was form, precision instruments and other objects were useful for sight and industry. Similarly, work and intellect is useful until the human body exists. So as long as this form, is there, it is only there as long as the body is there. When the body is not there, when the body is not conscious, all that is useless. Similarly, we see that not just in death, but in deep sleep. In deep sleep, all our material identity disappears. Our loved ones disappear. Our titles disappear, or everything disappears, right? And it gets dissolved in that substratum of that soul force. In the same way, he goes on to explain in this chapter, he says, rainwater does not undergo any change or alteration. Rainwater is H2O before it reaches earth. He says, after reaching the earth, according to the nature of the soil in different places. So if the soil is red color, the water will take the red color form. If the rainwater falls on soil that is dark, it'll take on that color, or brown. So he says that it becomes change in color, smell, good or bad. Sometimes you have things that are decomposing, it takes on that smell. There are times that fragrance, that are in the water, you see that it takes on that form, and taste. You see, all the water from that mountains come through, down through the valley, collects all the debris, takes on a different form and color and shape. But when it comes to the ocean, he says that an evaporation takes place. You see, and when that evaporation takes place, he says that all the colors, all the debris, everything, the sediments, everything is left behind. Only the water, the H2O, evaporates back up. So such as the water does not possess the previous color, taste, or smell. He says, similarly, No living beings gets rebirth after death. Just as many trees spring up from the seeds of a single tree, many children spring up from the semen of men before he dies. So here you see Swamiji speaks about this evolution, the change that is continuously happening in this material world due to the space and time continuum. But while all this change is happening, it is happening on a substratum that is unchanging. So Mahan gives examples of this, how that this very subtle thing that even the material body goes through the transformation. In essence, there is no such thing as birth completely gone. The form may be gone, but the essence of the materiality, changes, different forms, different bodies, and so on. In that same way, the soul substratum is permanent, right? So all this, so what do we mean by birth and death and reincarnation? You see that the scriptures speak about all these are, transitory illusions. So again, he explains this, this. So why do we then have, people fearing for, uh, you know, uh, fear of death and disease? It's because they don't understand, because they don't know what happens after death. And that's why the worry is. But if you know this very well, you see that you won't be afraid. You'd live better. You'd live, in a much more wholesome way. And that's why you see that, when you take to teachings like this, you realize that every year that passes by, every birthday that you celebrate, it reminds you that your end is coming here, your journey is coming to an end. As that happens, you see the time limitation must make your life more, valued for yourself and for other people. So again, Swamiji and others say, don't worry about past life and future life, which whether you go to Naragaloga or Indraloga or all these things. Don't worry. Just do the best here, and you would not face all these troubling things if you know who you are, you know what you're made out of. If you know what your body composition is, what your physical biology and spiritual biology, you see that the mind becomes peaceful, the mind becomes powerful, the mind becomes happy, the mind becomes liberated, and it's a wonderful journey for life that we live. So this is what Mahan tries to teach, and this is what the introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation is, to make us understand our lives really well, make us understand what birth is all about, make us understand what death is all about, and most importantly, make us understand and value this special thing that we've been given called life. Sandosham.